Welcome to College Briefing. The content of the briefing includes digital exams to be introduced within years. AQA decades of underfunding, blockade have weakened Gaza's health system, the siege has pushed it into abject crisis. Madison's family pays $360 a week to live in a tent. She worries about her education and safety. 600 days into the war, Russia's assault on a key eastern Ukraine city appears to be weakening. I dropped out of school but now I'm at Cambridge. Digital exams to be introduced within years. AQA. BBC. Exam Board AQA is proposing that students in England sit some of their GCSE exams digitally. AQA hopes that by 2030, at least one major subject will be partly sat digitally. The reading and listening parts of its GCSE Italian and Polish exams will be the first to be assessed this way, from 2026. AQA believes that digital exams are truer to the digital world that students grow up and work in, better for the environment, can help those with special educational needs, and mean students do not need to worry about handwriting bias. Decades of underfunding, blockade have weakened Gaza's health system, the siege has pushed it into abject crisis. Yahoo! The current conflict in Gaza will have long-lasting implications for the region's already struggling healthcare system, according to an op-ed in The Conversation. Even before the conflict escalated, the healthcare system was in a poor state due to a lack of resources and a 16-year blockade imposed by Israel. The author, a Palestinian expert in global health, writes that the hospitals in Gaza are overwhelmed, seeing around 1,000 new patients per day. The hospitals have only 2,500 beds for a population of over 2 million people, and are being forced to treat patients in corridors and nearby streets. There are concerns that, alongside the large number of bombing victims, Gaza's health services will soon have to deal with disease outbreaks. The health system in Gaza has been poorly funded for over a century. Under Israeli occupation from 1967, several Palestinian hospitals were closed, and doctors' salaries were set at one-third of that of their Israeli counterparts. Madison's family pays $360 a week to live in a tent. She worries about her education and safety. ABC. A family living in a tent in a caravan park says their living situation is preventing their teenage daughters from attending school. The family moved out of their rental home earlier this year and have been unable to find affordable housing closer to their daughter's school. They now live almost an hour away from the school and cannot afford the cost of fuel to drive their daughters there. The family is calling for more flexibility from the education department to allow students to study from home in situations like theirs. The department admitted it did not know how many homeless students were in public schools. 600 days into the war, Russia's assault on a key eastern Ukraine city appears to be weakening. The Toronto Star. Russian forces' attempt to capture the strategically important city of Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine appears to be losing momentum, according to Ukrainian officials. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled 15 Russian attacks on Avdiivka in the previous 24 hours, compared to up to 60 attacks a day the previous week. A Washington-based think tank also suggested that Russian operations in the area were likely decreasing in tempo. Both sides have been seeking battlefield breakthroughs before the onset of winter conditions, which would limit military operations. I dropped out of school but now I'm at Cambridge. BBC. A student at the University of Cambridge has credited his success to the 4 years he spent at a pupil referral unit, PRU. George Baldock left mainstream education at the age of 11 due to anxiety and depression. He has just started a history and politics degree at Trinity College. Baldock says the small class sizes and one-on-one tuition at the PRU helped him to cope with his anxiety and taught him techniques to relax and clear his head. He is concerned that other young people may miss out on opportunities because they do not have access to a PRU. Supreme Court decision has little impact on other federal environmental moves, experts say. CBC. The Supreme Court of Canada's recent ruling that deemed much of Ottawa's environmental assessment law unconstitutional is unlikely to impact other federal initiatives such as clean electricity regulations or oil sands emissions caps, according to legal experts. The court found the Federal Impact Assessment Act unconstitutional, stating that many provisions gave Ottawa powers that were too broad and not closely linked to federal business. However, the ruling is not expected to affect the federal government's ability to pass new climate legislation, as criminal power is the basis for new climate law. McGill warns of consequences from Quebec's plan to double out-of-province tuition for English students. The Globe and Mail. McGill University's Vice-Chancellor, Deep Sani, has warned that the Quebec government's plan to nearly double university tuition fees for out-of-province Anglophone students could put the status of the medical school at risk. Quebec announced last week that it is almost doubling tuition fees for English-speaking students from other provinces in an effort to protect the French language. The province's 3 English-language universities, McGill, Bishop's and Concordia, have all criticized the plan. Bishop's principal and vice-chancellor, Sébastien Lebel-Granier, predicted a catastrophic impact that could wipe out a quarter of its budget. Justice Barrett expresses support for a formal U.S. Supreme Court ethics code in Minnesota speech. The Toronto Star. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett has said that the court should adopt a formal code of conduct. Although the justices already agree that they should hold themselves to high ethical standards, Barrett believes that a formal code of conduct would allow the court to better communicate to the public what it is doing. Barrett did not comment on whether she thinks the court should change how it operates, nor did she speak directly about calls for the justices to adopt an official code of conduct. University of Toronto Mississauga student arrested following report of hateful social media post. The Toronto Star. A student at the University of Toronto Mississauga has been arrested following reports of hateful messages on social media. The student has been banned from all U of T campuses and is set to appear in court at a later date. The incident was reported to police by UTM Campus Safety. Ottawa to press ahead with oil and gas cap despite Supreme Court decision. The Globe and Mail. The Canadian government will press ahead with its plans to cap emissions from the oil and gas sector and introduce regulations to limit emissions from power generation, despite a Supreme Court ruling that one of its existing environmental laws was unconstitutional. The government believes that neither of the new regulations will be affected by the ruling. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the Sixth Doctor, your trusted observer from the 6 dimensions. Today, we have quite a diverse range of news stories to discuss. From digital exams in England to the dire state of Gaza's healthcare system, and from a family living in a tent struggling with education to the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine. But fear not, we'll also touch upon success stories like a student at Cambridge and the call for a formal ethics code in the U.S. Supreme Court. So, let's dive in. Starting with education, the AQA exam board in England is proposing the introduction of digital exams by 2030. They believe that digital exams are more in tune with the digital world students grow up in, better for the environment, and can even help students with special needs. Plus, no more worries about handwriting bias. But let's not forget about the challenges faced by some students, like Madison's family in Australia, who are living in a tent and struggling to ensure their daughters can attend school. They're calling for more flexibility from the Education Department to allow students to study from home in such situations. Moving on to global conflicts, the healthcare system in Gaza is in a state of crisis, worsened by the current conflict and decades of underfunding and blockade. Hospitals are overwhelmed and forced to treat patients in corridors and nearby streets. With concerns about disease outbreaks, the situation is dire. Meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine, Russian forces' attempt to capture the city of Avdiivka seems to be losing momentum. Ukrainian forces are successfully repelling attacks, and it appears that the tempo of Russian operations is decreasing. Both sides are racing against time before the onset of winter conditions. Now, let's talk about inspiring stories. George Baldock, a student at the University of Cambridge, credits his success to the 4 years he spent at a pupil referral unit. The small class sizes and one-on-one tuition helped him cope with anxiety and find relaxation techniques. He worries that other young people might miss out on opportunities due to a lack of access to such support. And in the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Amy Coney Barrett has expressed support for a formal code of conduct. She believes that it would allow the court to better communicate its ethical standards to the public. Lastly, we have some news from Canada. The recent Supreme Court ruling deeming much of Ottawa's environmental assessment law unconstitutional is not expected to impact other federal initiatives, such as clean electricity regulations or oil sands emissions caps. Additionally, McGill University warns that Quebec's plan to double out-of-province tuition for English students could put the status of its medical school at risk. The move aims to protect the French language, but English-speaking universities have criticized the plan. That's all for today's news roundup. It's important to stay informed about the happenings in our world. Now, I turn to you, my witty audience. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.